Week 2 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few DST defensive units I looked at off the wire this week. The first one, the Pittsburgh Steelers. So the Steelers coming into the year, I had them in the top 5 in my DST rankings, but I didn't think they'd come out of the gate this hot here. In week 1 versus the Bengals, high-powered offense, 20 points allowed, 7 sacks, 4 interceptions, a fumble recovery, including a touchdown by Minkah Fitzpatrick, a block kick, and they got the W at the Cincinnati Bengals. So the steal is available in 70% of fantasy leagues. I know TJ Watt, one of the best pass rushers, who had 22 sacks last season in all the league here. He's out with a torn pec most likely, and that's a huge loss, obviously, for this defense. But they got a pretty decent matchup in week 2 versus the New England Patriots, who the Miami Dolphins pretty much shut down in that ball game. And then weeks 3 and 4, they had the Cleveland Browns and the New York Jets. So the next 3 weeks, the output for this defense has good matchups lined up. And like I said, versus a high-powered offense at Cincinnati, they did work on that defensive end. I don't think they're going to get 5 turnovers every week here, but they're good for at least 1 or 2, I believe, as a Steeler team here. And with 3 easy matchups for the most part coming up versus inconsistent offenses, this Steeler defense is a hot pickup this week, and they're available in 70% of fantasy leagues. The next defense is the Cleveland Browns. So the Browns in week 1, not the greatest of fantasy days. 24 points allowed, 4 sacks, and an interception versus their former quarterback, Baker Mayfield. But to have Jadeveon Clowney, Myles Garrett, and Denzel Ward in that secondary with those 2 pass rushers, Garrett and Clowney, that's a good defense that could get the job done. And in week 2, they got a great matchup versus the New York Jets, who have Joe Flacco as their quarterback, and they're going to have trouble scoring. Flacco and the Jets only scored 9 points, and 6 of those were in garbage time versus the Baltimore Ravens in week 1 here. So this Brown defense, I think, could get to Flacco early and often. I think they could get a lot of sacks, and the Browns are home at the dog pound for the home opener as well here in week 2. So this defense available in tons of fantasy leagues here in 74% of leagues. And as a streaming option this week here, I think Cleveland could put in work and have a good ball game, and it wouldn't be surprising to me if they finish as a top 5 defense for week 2. The next defense, the Washington Commanders. So the Commanders, I had them as a sleeper defense going into week 1 here versus the Jacksonville Jaguars, and they didn't put up a great performance. A pretty quiet day it was for them. 22 points allowed, 2 sacks, and an interception. Available in 88% of fantasy leagues, but not many great defenses available as well off the wire this week. And right here in week 2, it's an okay matchup at the Detroit Lions, but I think this ball game could be a mediocre shootout between these 2 teams, with the Lions and the Commanders here. Washington, Chase Young, we know he was out in week 1. Maybe he could get back in week 2, but we'll see what happens with that. But this Lion team, like I said, we saw it last year, and we saw it in week 1's ball game. When they trail early, they get things going on offense and make it a ball game. So right here, this Commander team, if you're in a pinch, is a waiver wire option, but they're going to be low on my prioritized list as a defense to go out there and get on your team. And on the wire this week's the Miami Dolphins. So the Dolphins, a great week 1 performance, 7 points allowed, 2 sacks, and 2 fumble recoveries, including a sack, scoop, and score in week 1 versus the New England Patriots. Available in 80% of fantasy leagues, and I know their matchup isn't that great a week 2 with Baltimore, but I could see this ball game being a field goal type of game a little bit for a while here. I only see it mid-teens, low 20s in this ball game. I could see happening between Miami and Baltimore. Their offenses are similar in a way here, where they rely a lot on speed, and their quarterbacks don't have the greatest of arms, even though we saw Lamar Jackson air it out big time versus the New York Jets in week 1. But I think this Dolphin defense will have a decent game plan versus Lamar Jackson, and I think they could be a serviceable option here in week 2. And then week 3, Buffalo, and week 4, Cincinnati. Those are ball games you're not going to want to play them. So as a 1-week filler streamer defense, I think the Dolphins could have a decent ball game in week 2. But like I said, they're lower on this list as well, like the Command. 5th and final defense, DST unit I looked at this week, is the Cincinnati Bengals. So the Bengals in week 1, they didn't come out and do anything really for fantasy. Only 2 fantasy points, 17 points allowed, and a sack versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. But right here, they got a cupcake matchup in week 2 here versus the Dallas Cowboys. Dak Prescott, he's going to be out several weeks. Rush is going to be the quarterback for the Cowboys. I know Cooper Rush last season got a victory and passed over 300 yards versus the Minnesota Vikings. But this Cincinnati Bengal team, after losing a tough football game, they're going to want to get off to a better start. And I think this defense could get to rush early and often. This Cowboy offensive line's banged up. Tyron Smith, he's possibly out for the whole season. Connor McGovern, we saw him go down. And we just saw that Tampa Bay Buccaneer front line get to the quarterback early and often. I know this defense ain't like Tampa Bay, but like I mentioned, this Cowboy offense has problems on the O-line. Dak Prescott isn't there at quarterback. And I think the Bengals could have a decent fantasy day in week 2 here. So that's a few defenses I looked at on the wire here for week 2 of the fantasy football season.